I never told my son, Torres, about the $40,000 that appeared in my bank account every month. For the 35 years of his life, he saw only what I allowed him to see: a woman who lived a quiet, unassuming life in a modest apartment. He saw the faded handbag I carried until the leather cracked, the simple clothes I bought from discount racks, and the home-cooked meals made from whatever was on sale at the grocery store. To him, I was just his mother, a secretary or maybe a low-level office manager, someone who worked hard for a small paycheck and counted her pennies. I never corrected this assumption. I let him believe it because I wanted him to build his own life, to find value in effort, not inheritance. I grew up in a world where wealth was a whisper, not a shout, and I had become a master of silence. My silence, however, was not one of poverty. It was the silence of power. For 2 decades, I had been a senior executive at a global logistics firm, a ghost in the machine who moved millions of dollars in assets with a single keystroke. I negotiated contracts that shaped skylines and made decisions that affected thousands of employees across continents. I had built a fortune quietly, investing every spare dollar, letting my wealth grow in the shadows like a great unseen oak tree. True strength doesn't need an audience. It simply needs to exist. So when Torres called me that Tuesday afternoon, his voice tight with a familiar anxiety I hadn't heard since he'd broken a neighbor's window as a boy, I knew something was wrong. His words were simple, but the undercurrent was a raging river of unease. "Mom," he began, his voice strained, "I need to ask you for something. Kalissa's parents are here from overseas. It's their first visit and, well, they want to meet you. We're all going to dinner on Saturday at North Gate. Can you please come?" North Gate. The name hung in the air between us. It wasn't just a restaurant, it was a statement. It was a place where a single bottle of wine cost more than my monthly rent, where the clientele didn't need to look at the prices on the menu. The choice of venue was a message, and I understood it perfectly. This wasn't a casual family get-together. This was an inspection. "Do they know anything about me?" I asked, my voice calm, betraying none of the cold dread coiling in my stomach. There was a pause, a long, telling silence that was more damning than any confession. I told them you work in an office," Torres stammered, the words tumbling out in a rush. "That you live alone, that you're simple, that you don't have much." There it was, simple. The single dismissive adjective he used to summarize my entire existence, my 4 decades of struggle, of sacrifice, of building an empire from nothing, all reduced to that one pathetic word. In that moment, I wasn't his mother. I was a potential embarrassment, a problem to be managed, a piece of his past he had to apologize for. A deep, cold resolve settled over me, chilling the initial sting of his words. If they wanted a poor, simple woman, then that is exactly what I would give them. I would become the person they expected to see. I would be a broke, naive mother barely scraping by. I wanted to see their faces up close when they looked down on me. I wanted to feel the texture of their contempt. Because my instincts, honed over 20 years of navigating corporate boardrooms filled with sharks, told me something was deeply wrong with this family, and my instincts are never wrong. "Of course, son," I said, my voice soft and agreeable. "I'll be there." After I hung up, I walked through my apartment. The furniture was old but comfortable, the walls bare of any expensive art. Nothing about my home screamed wealth. It was a perfect camouflage, a stage I had built for myself over the years. This Saturday, I would give the performance of a lifetime. I would let them judge my worn-out shoes and my wrinkled dress. I would let them measure my worth by the contents of my handbag. And when they were finished, when they felt secure in their superiority, I would show them what true power looked like. What happened that night would shatter their perfectly curated world in a way they could never imagine, and trust me, they would deserve every single second of it. Saturday arrived like a verdict. The day was gray and overcast, matching the cold knot of anticipation in my chest. I opened my closet and pushed past the tailored suits and silk blouses I wore for my real life, reaching for the back where my costume was waiting. I chose a shapeless, pale gray dress that I'd bought from a thrift store years ago for a charity event. It was wrinkled and bland, designed to make the wearer disappear. I paired it with flat, scuffed shoes and a faded canvas tote bag that had seen better days. I pulled my hair back into a messy, careless ponytail and looked at my reflection. The woman staring back at me was a stranger. She looked tired, beaten down by life, her eyes holding a look of timid apology. She was forgettable. She was perfect. I called a taxi instead of my usual car service. As we drove towards the wealthiest part of the city, I felt a strange mix of sadness and steel. Sadness for my son, for his insecurity that made him feel he had to hide his own mother. But underneath it was a core of unyielding steel. I was not doing this just for myself. I was doing this to see the truth, to unmask the people my son had married into. The taxi pulled up to North Gate. The entrance glowed with warm, exclusive light. A doorman in a crisp white uniform opened the doors for impeccably dressed couples who glided inside without a second glance. I paid the driver, took a deep, steadying breath, and walked through those doors, leaving Melinda, the executive, behind and becoming Melinda, the poor, simple mother. They were already there, seated at a long table by a large window overlooking the city lights. Torres stood beside the table, looking stiff and uncomfortable, in a dark, perfectly tailored suit. He was fidgeting with his cuffs, his eyes darting towards the entrance every few seconds. Beside him stood Calissa, my daughter-in-law. She was a vision in a cream-colored dress that shimmered with subtle gold accents. Her hair was a flawless sheet of black silk falling over her shoulders. She was beautiful, but her expression was tense, her smile a fragile, painted-on thing. She wasn't looking for me. She was dreading my arrival. And then I saw them. Her parents. They were seated like monarchs holding court. The mother, Maruka, was draped in an emerald green dress that glittered with sequins. Diamonds dripped from her neck, her wrists, and her fingers, catching the light with every small movement. Her face was a mask of cold, calculated beauty. Beside her, her husband, Luis, sat with an air of immense self-importance. He wore an immaculate gray suit and a watch on his wrist that was so large and garish it looked more like a piece of machinery than a timepiece. They both radiated an aura of immense, unshakable wealth. I began my slow walk towards them, my steps deliberately short and hesitant, my eyes cast downwards as if I were unworthy of being in such a grand place. Torres saw me first. A flicker of panic crossed his face, his eyes widening as he took in my appearance from head to toe. I saw him swallow hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Mom," he said, his voice strained, "you came." "Of course, son. I'm here," I answered with a timid smile, the kind of smile a mouse gives a cat. Calissa leaned in for a quick, cold kiss on my cheek. It was a mechanical gesture, devoid of any warmth. "Mother-in-law," she said, her eyes avoiding mine. "It's so good to see you." Her tone suggested it was anything but. She turned to her parents, her voice taking on an apologetic edge. "Mom, Dad, this is Torres's mother, Melinda." Maruka's eyes swept over me, a slow, deliberate appraisal that felt like being stripped bare. I saw it all in that one look, the judgment, the thinly veiled disgust, the profound disappointment. Her gaze lingered on my wrinkled dress, my scuffed shoes, my pathetic canvas bag. She didn't offer a smile, just extended a limp, cold hand for a brief, dismissive shake. "A pleasure," she said, the words as frigid as her touch. Luis did the same, a phantom of a smile playing on his lips that never reached his eyes. "Charmed," he murmured, his handshake just as weak. I was shown to the seat at the far end of the table, the one most removed from them, as if I were a child relegated to the kids' table. No one pulled out my chair. No one asked if I needed anything. The waiter, silent and efficient, placed a heavy, leather-bound menu in front of me. It was written entirely in French. I opened it and feigned confusion, my brow furrowed as I stared at the incomprehensible words. Maruka was watching me, a smug little smile on her face. "Do you need some help with that, Melinda?" she asked, her voice dripping with condescension. "Oh yes, please," I said, my voice small and grateful. "I don't recognize any of these words. It's all so fancy." She let out a theatrical sigh, a sound of profound boredom. "Let me order for you then. Something simple," she declared, not to me, but to the waiter. "We don't want to get anything too extravagant." The insult hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Luis nodded in agreement. Torres stared at his water glass, his knuckles white. Calissa began shredding her napkin in her lap. The conversation started, but I was not a part of it. I was an observer, a ghost at their feast. Maruka spoke at length about their trip, complaining about the long flight in first class, the mediocre service at their $1,000-a-night hotel, and the sheer number of designer stores they had already visited. "We just picked up a few things," she announced to the table. "Nothing major. Just a little something for Calissa, a new handbag. It was only $5,000. She glanced at me, waiting for a reaction, expecting me to be dazzled by the casual mention of such a sum. I just nodded and gave her my best meek smile. "How lovely," I whispered. "You know," she continued, leaning forward as if sharing a great secret, "we've always been prudent. We worked hard for what we have. Luis has built a formidable business empire, and she paused, preening slightly, I manage our extensive portfolio of investments, properties in 3 countries, you know." She then turned her full attention to me, her eyes sharp and predatory. "And you, Melinda, what is it you do exactly?" Her tone was sickly sweet, a candy coating over a core of pure poison. "I work in an office," I replied, lowering my gaze to my lap. "I handle paperwork, do some filing, simple things." Maruka and Luis exchanged a look, a quick, silent communication that spoke volumes. "Ah, an administrative role," Maruka said, nodding sagely. "That's nice. Every job is dignified. Isn't that right?" "Of course," I agreed, my voice barely a whisper. The first course arrived. It was a masterpiece of culinary art on an enormous plate, with a portion so small it looked like a garnish. Maruka cut into her seared scallop with surgical precision. $80 for this," she announced loudly. "But it's worth every penny. You can't put a price on quality. One mustn't eat just anything, after all." She looked directly at me as she said it, another subtle jab at my simple, unrefined life. I simply nodded, agreeing with her, feeding her arrogance. Torres tried to steer the conversation toward his work, but Maruka cut him off. "Tell me, Melinda," she said, her voice filled with a false, pitying concern. "Do you live all by yourself?" Torres answered for me. "Yes, Mom has a small apartment." Maruka sighed dramatically, placing a diamond-encrusted hand on her chest. "Oh, you poor thing. It must be so difficult all alone at your age. Does your little salary cover all your expenses? It must be a struggle." I felt the trap tightening around me, the walls of their judgment closing in. "I manage," I said softly. "I save where I can. I don't need much." "How brave," she cooed, her voice oozing insincerity. "I truly admire women who have to struggle. Of course, one always wants to give one's children the very best, to provide them with a life of comfort and opportunity. But," she paused, delivering the final devastating blow, "we all just do what we can, don't we?" There it was, the accusation. She was telling me in her own veiled way that I had failed my son, that I was an inadequate mother who hadn't given him the life he deserved. Calissa was staring intently at her plate, wishing she could disappear. Torres's jaw was clenched so tightly I was afraid his teeth might crack. And me? I just smiled my timid, broken smile. "Yes," I said, my voice steady. "You're absolutely right. Everyone gives what they can." The rage inside me wasn't hot. It was a cold, quiet thing, a frozen river waiting for the thaw. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that before this night was over, that river would break its banks and sweep them all away. As Maruka's venomous words, "We all just do what we can, don't we?" settled over the table, a strange calm washed over me. The opulent dining room, with its crystal chandeliers and hushed waiters, faded into a dull background hum. Her voice, so full of manufactured pity, became the trigger that unlocked 40 years of memories I had kept under lock and key. In my mind, I was no longer in this temple of excess. I was back in a cramped one-bedroom apartment that always smelled faintly of stale coffee and baby formula, the place where my real life, the one no one at this table could possibly comprehend, was forged. The foundation of my life wasn't built on stock portfolios or real estate. It was built on desperation and an unconditional love for the little boy who was now a grown man sitting across from me, looking anywhere but at my face. 40 years ago, I was 23 and completely alone. The man who had promised me forever vanished the moment I told him I was pregnant, disappearing like a footprint in the sand. My own family, steeped in a rigid, old-fashioned sense of shame, turned their backs on me. I was a disgrace, a cautionary tale whispered about at family gatherings I was no longer invited to. I had nothing but a low-wage secretarial job and a fierce, terrifying determination to survive. Torres was born on a cold Tuesday in November. Holding him for the first time, this tiny, perfect being who depended on me for everything, I felt a shift in the universe. My fear didn't disappear, but it was overshadowed by a purpose so profound it felt holy. He was my reason. He was my entire world. From that moment on, every decision I made was for him. I went back to work 2 weeks after he was born, leaving him with an elderly neighbor, May, whose kindness was the only charity I ever accepted. The ache in my arms from not holding him was a constant physical pain, a phantom limb I carried with me through 12-hour workdays. While other women my age were going out, dating, and building their futures, I was building ours in the quiet, lonely hours of the night. After putting Torres to bed, I would spread textbooks across our small kitchen table and study. I taught myself accounting from library books, learned business administration through correspondence courses, and practiced English with cassette tapes until my accent was flawless. I was a sponge, soaking up every piece of knowledge I could, because I knew that knowledge was the only weapon I had against the poverty that threatened to swallow us whole. The promotions came slowly at first, each one a small victory celebrated with a shared ice cream cone with Torres. Secretary to administrative assistant, assistant to office coordinator. Each step up the ladder meant a little more money, a little more breathing room. It meant we could afford fresh fruit instead of canned. It meant I could finally buy Torres a new pair of sneakers instead of hoping the holes in his old ones wouldn't get bigger. He never knew the silent calculations I made over every dollar, the nights I ate plain toast for dinner so he could have chicken. He just knew his mother worked hard and loved him fiercely. That was all I wanted him to know. The big break came when I was 35. The same age Torres is now. The company I worked for was acquired by a multinational corporation. During the transition, there was chaos. Systems failed, logistics broke down, and no one knew what to do. But I did. I had spent years quietly observing, learning every facet of the company, not because I was asked, but because I was curious. I understood the machinery of the business better than the executives who were being paid 10 times my salary. I stepped forward and presented a solution. It was a risky move, but I had nothing to lose. They listened. They were impressed. And they offered me a position I never dreamed I'd have. Junior project manager. That was the beginning of my other life, my secret life. The money started coming in, more than I had ever seen. But I didn't change a thing about how we lived. We stayed in the same modest apartment. We drove the same used car. I kept shopping at discount stores. I did it because by then, Torres was a teenager. I had seen what unearned money did to kids. It made them soft, entitled, and disconnected from the value of hard work. I was terrified of that. I had spent my life instilling in him the principles of effort, humility, and gratitude. I wasn't going to let a paycheck undo all of that. My wealth became my secret, a treasure I buried deep, not out of shame, but out of protection for the only thing in the world that truly mattered, my son's character. As Torres grew into a fine young man, hardworking, kind, and responsible, I climbed higher and higher in my secret world. Manager, senior manager, director, vice president. With each promotion, the numbers in my hidden investment account swelled, but my visible life remained the same. Our bond was everything. We were a team. I went to all his baseball games, helped him with his homework, and listened to all his dreams. He was a good son. He never asked for much and was always grateful for what he had. He'd get a part-time job in the summer, not because I forced him to, but because he wanted to contribute, to buy his own things. I was so incredibly proud of him. Then he met Calissa. When he first brought her home, my heart swelled with a cautious optimism. She was bright and beautiful, and she looked at my son with a genuine adoration that warmed me. She didn't seem to care that we lived in a simple apartment or that his mother served dinner on mismatched plates. She laughed at my stories and praised my cooking. She seemed to love Torres for who he was, not for what he might have. For a few years, everything was perfect. Calissa felt like the daughter I never had. We'd go shopping together at the discount stores I frequented and talk for hours. She was sweet and unassuming, and she made my son happy. The change was gradual, a slow poisoning of the well. It began after her parents, Maruca and Luis, paid for a lavish down payment on their first house. It was a gift, they called it, but it felt more like a transaction, an investment. Suddenly, the conversations at our family dinners began to shift. Calissa started talking about brands I'd never heard of, vacation destinations I couldn't pronounce, and the importance of keeping up appearances. The easy, natural warmth between us began to cool, replaced by a polite but noticeable distance. She stopped suggesting we go shopping at my favorite stores. Instead, she would show me photos of her new designer purchases, gifts from her mother. The talk was no longer about dreams and feelings, but about assets and acquisitions. A silence began to grow in the spaces where our laughter used to be. I saw my son being pulled into their world, a world where value was measured in dollars and cents. He started dressing differently, talking differently. He began to look at our modest apartment with a faint, almost imperceptible embarrassment. He started seeing me not as the strong, capable woman who had raised him against all odds, but as the simple mother he had to apologize for. He started worrying about me. He'd offer to pay my bills or buy my groceries, his gestures born from a mix of love and, I suspect, a growing shame. I always gently refused, telling him I was fine, that I had my savings. I let him believe I needed his protection because I thought it was his way of showing he cared. I never imagined it would curdle into this public humiliation where he would sit silently while his mother was dismantled piece by piece by these soulless, arrogant people. We always made sure our daughter had the best, Maruca continued, her voice snapping me back to the present. She took a delicate sip of her expensive red wine. She attended the finest schools, traveled the world, learned 4 languages. When she married your son, we were happy to help them. We paid for their honeymoon to Europe, 3 weeks, all 5-star hotels. We believe in supporting our children, in giving them a head start. She fixed her cold eyes on me again. Were you able to help Torres with anything when they got married? Melinda? The question was a dagger designed to twist and inflict maximum pain. She knew the answer. She wanted to hear me say it. She wanted me to admit my inadequacy in front of my son and her daughter. "Not much," I said, my voice a carefully constructed whisper of shame. I gave them what I could, a small gift. I remembered the gift clearly, a set of beautiful hand-painted dishes I had found at an antique market, something I thought was personal and full of history. I wondered now if they had ever even used them, or if they were tucked away in a closet, a relic from a life they were trying to leave behind. "How sweet," Maruka said, her smile a predatory slash of red lipstick. "Every little bit counts, I suppose. It's the thought that matters, not the amount." And that's when the cold rage inside me began to crystallize into a plan. The river of anger was no longer just waiting to break its banks. It was now being channeled, directed, and aimed. These people didn't just look down on poverty. They worshiped money with a religious fervor. They had spent the entire evening using it as a weapon to humiliate me and assert their dominance. And I realized with a chilling clarity that the only way to beat them, the only language they would ever understand, was money. I would let them continue. I would let them dig their own graves with their arrogance and their condescension. I would absorb every insult, every pitying glance, every backhanded compliment. I would let them build their tower of superiority so high that the fall would be all the more devastating. They thought they were evaluating me, a poor, simple woman. They had no idea that I was the one evaluating them, and they were failing in every way that mattered. The dinner was no longer an ordeal to be endured. It had become a hunt, and I was the predator, cloaked in the perfect camouflage of poverty, patiently waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Maruka's smile widened, a triumphant glint in her eyes. She believed she had won. In her world, a world of visible price tags and calculated transactions, she had successfully established my worthlessness. She had reduced me to a charity case, a footnote in my own son's life story. Having asserted her dominance, she leaned back in her chair, swirling a glass of wine that cost more than my weekly grocery budget. "This," she announced to no one in particular, "is from an exclusive vineyard in Bordeaux, $200 a bottle. But when one appreciates quality, one doesn't skimp. Do you enjoy wine, Melinda?" The question was not an invitation to a conversation. It was another test, another opportunity for her to highlight the chasm between her world and mine. "Only on special occasions," I replied, my voice perfectly pitched to convey a life of small, infrequent pleasures. "And it's usually the kind that comes in a box. I don't know much about all these fancy labels." A condescending little laugh escaped her lips. "Oh, don't you worry. Not everyone is born with a refined palate. It's something that develops with experience, with travel, with a certain level of exposure. Luis and I have toured vineyards across Europe and South America. We consider ourselves quite knowledgeable." Luis, who had been silent for most of the dinner, nodded in solemn agreement. "It's a passion of ours. Calissa is learning as well. She has an excellent sense of taste. She inherited it from her mother." He beamed at his daughter, who offered a weak, fleeting smile in return, her eyes still fixed on the tablecloth as if it held the secrets to the universe. Maruka turned her attention back to me, her gaze sweeping over me once more, as if she couldn't quite believe the drabness of my existence. "And what about you, Melinda? Do you have any hobbies? Anything you enjoy doing in your spare time?" I shrugged, a gesture of simple resignation. "I watch television. I enjoy cooking. Sometimes I take a walk in the park. Just simple things." The look that passed between Maruka and Luis was so thick with pity, it was almost a physical thing. I could feel it pressing down on me, heavy and suffocating. "How quaint," Maruka said, her voice a silken purr of disdain. "Simple pleasures certainly have their own charm, though one always hopes to aspire to more, doesn't one? To see the world, to experience new cultures, to grow. But I suppose," she added with a magnanimous sigh. Not everyone is afforded those opportunities. I just nodded. You're right, not everyone is. Each word of agreement was a stone I was laying, building the foundation for the trap I was about to spring. The more I agreed with her, the more I fed her sense of superiority, the more confident she became. And her confidence was making her careless. The waiter cleared our plates and brought out dessert menus. Maruka, naturally, ordered the most ostentatious item, a chocolate lava cake adorned with edible gold flakes. $30 for a bite of cake, she marveled, taking a tiny, delicate spoonful. But this is what sets a place like Northgate apart. It's all in the details. See the little gold flakes? It's a touch of true luxury. I had ordered a simple creme brulee. As I tapped the caramelized sugar with my spoon, the sharp crack echoed the sound of my patience finally breaking. The performance was coming to an end. The time for meek smiles and timid nods was over. Maruka put down her spoon and adopted a serious, almost maternal expression. It was a terrifyingly false look, a wolf poorly disguised in sheep's clothing. You know, she began, her voice low and conspiratorial, I think it's important we have a family discussion, now that we're all here together. Torres immediately tensed. Mom, maybe this isn't the right time or place. Maruka held up a hand, a gesture that was both imperious and dismissive. Nonsense, darling, this is the perfect time. Let me finish. She turned her gaze to me, her eyes boring into mine. Melinda, Torres is our son-in-law and we love him dearly, and we know how much our Calissa loves him. We respect their union, but as parents we will always want what is best for our daughter. The air grew thick with unspoken meaning. My son's face was a mask of pale, helpless anger. Calissa seemed to shrink in her seat, her head bowed low. I understand you did the best you could raising Torres, Maruka continued, her voice dripping with a poisonous sympathy. I'm sure it wasn't easy doing it all on your own, and for that, you have my deepest respect. The compliment was an insult, a way of framing my entire life as a struggle I had barely survived. But Torres is in a different phase of his life now. He's a husband, he has responsibilities, and he and Calissa deserve to have a life of stability. Stability? I asked, my voice still soft but with a new edge of curiosity that she was too arrogant to notice. Yes, she replied, nodding emphatically. Financial stability, emotional stability. Luis and I have helped them a great deal, and we will continue to do so, but we also feel it's important that Torres isn't weighed down by unnecessary burdens. The word hung in the air between us, as sharp and ugly as a shard of broken glass. Burdens. She was calling me a burden, his own mother. Burdens? I repeated, letting the word settle. Maruka sighed, as if explaining a complex concept to a small child. Please don't misunderstand me, Melinda. I don't mean to be harsh, but at your age, living alone on what must be a very limited income, it's only natural that your son worries about you. He's a good boy. He feels a sense of duty to take care of you, but we don't want that worry to put a strain on his marriage, on their future. Do you see what I'm saying? Perfectly, I said. My voice was calm, but inside me, the frozen river had begun to crack. A triumphant smile spread across Maruka's face. She thought I understood, that I was accepting my place as the family problem. Oh, good. I'm so glad you're being so reasonable about this. You see, Luis and I have been thinking. We'd like to help you. She paused for dramatic effect, letting the offer hang in the air. We would be willing to provide you with a small monthly stipend, a little allowance, if you will, something to help you live more comfortably so that Torres doesn't have to carry that weight. It wouldn't be a fortune, of course. We can't work miracles, but it would be a gesture of support. I remained perfectly still, my expression unreadable. I just watched her, waiting for the other shoe to drop. She continued, leaning in closer. And in return, she whispered, All we would ask is that you give Torres and Calissa their space. Perhaps not call so often, not rely on them for little things. Just allow them the freedom to build their own lives without any outside interference. There it was, the offer, the bribe, wrapped in the pretty paper of charity. They wanted to pay me to disappear. They wanted to buy my silence, to erase my presence from my son's life so I wouldn't tarnish their daughter's perfect gilded world. Torres finally snapped. "Mom, that's enough," he hissed, his voice trembling with rage. "You can't." Maruka cut him off sharply. "Torres, be quiet. We are having an adult conversation. Your mother understands. Don't you, Melinda?" Everyone at the table turned to look at me. Maruka with an expectant smirk. Luis with an air of detached arrogance. Calissa with shame-filled eyes. And my son with a look of desperate, pleading apology. I slowly picked up my linen napkin from my lap. I deliberately, calmly wiped my lips. I took a slow sip of water, letting the silence stretch, letting the tension build until it was almost unbearable. And then I spoke. When my voice came out, it was different. It was no longer the timid, hesitant whisper of the woman who had walked into this restaurant. It was the voice I used in boardrooms, the voice that commanded attention, the voice that signed million-dollar deals. It was firm, clear, and as cold as ice. "That's a fascinating proposal, Maruka," I said, looking her directly in the eye. "Truly generous of you." Her victorious smile faltered slightly, confused by my sudden change in tone. "Well, I'm glad you see it that way." "I do," I said, nodding slowly. "But before I accept, I have a few questions, just for the sake of clarity." She blinked. "Of course. Ask anything you like." I leaned forward, my hands clasped on the table. "You mentioned a modest monthly allowance. How much exactly were you thinking? I'm just curious about the value you've placed on my disappearance." Maruka hesitated, taken aback by the directness of the question. "Well, we were thinking in the range of $500, maybe $700, depending on your needs." "I see," I said, my voice dangerously calm. $700 a month, so my silence is worth $23 a day. That's your final offer?" Her face began to flush. "I wouldn't phrase it like that." "But that is what it is, isn't it?" I pressed. "You're offering me money to stay away from my own son." She shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "We are simply trying to help." "Of course. Help," I repeated, the word tasting like poison. "Like you helped with the down payment on the house. How much was that, again? I believe you mentioned a number." Luis, seeing his wife floundering, stepped in. "We gave them $40,000, he said, his voice full of pride. "Ah, 40,000, I mused. "And the honeymoon? A 3-week tour of Europe?" Maruka, recovering slightly, puffed out her chest. "That was another 15,000, a wedding gift." "So you've invested approximately $55,000 into this marriage," I calculated aloud, my eyes never leaving theirs. "That's quite an investment. Tell me, what kind of return are you expecting on that?" Maruka looked utterly baffled. "Return? What do you mean?" My voice dropped, becoming sharper, colder. "I mean, did that money buy you what you wanted? Did it buy you control? Did it buy you obedience? Or did you just end up with a son-in-law who is ashamed of his own mother and a daughter who can't even look me in the eye?" The atmosphere at the table shattered. The polite facade crumbled, revealing the raw, ugly truth underneath. Maruka's face went pale. Luis's jaw tightened. "Excuse me?" Maruka stammered. "You have spent this entire dinner talking about one thing and one thing only. Money," I said, my voice rising with a controlled fury. "How much things cost? How much you have? How much you've spent? You haven't asked me a single question about my life. You haven't asked if I'm happy, if I'm lonely, if I'm well. You have simply sat there, calculating my net worth, and you have decided that I am worth $700 a month. You have measured my soul with your checkbook." "That is not what we were doing," Luis interjected, his voice stern. "Isn't it?" I shot back, turning my icy gaze on him. "Then what were you doing? Were you trying to connect with me? To get to know the woman who raised the man your daughter married? Or were you just waiting for the first opportunity to humiliate me, to put me in my place, to offer me charity so you could feel powerful?" He opened his mouth, but no words came out. My son was staring at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and awe. He had never seen this side of me. No one had. I placed my napkin deliberately on the table and leaned back in my chair. There was no more timidity in my posture, no more apology in my eyes. "You said you admire brave women who struggle alone," I said, locking eyes with Maruka. "So let me ask you a question. Have you ever, in your entire pampered life, struggled for anything? Have you ever built something from nothing, with your own two hands without a man's money to back you up?" Maruka sputtered, her face turning a blotchy red. "I have my own accomplishments." "Such as?" I asked, my curiosity genuine. "Tell me, I'm dying to know." This was the turning point, the moment the prey became the hunter, and I was just getting started. Maruka's face, a moment before a canvas of smug superiority, was now a storm of conflicting emotions: shock, indignation, and a dawning, horrified confusion. She was a queen whose subjects had suddenly forgotten how to bow. She adjusted the diamond necklace at her throat, a nervous gesture that betrayed the unraveling of her composure. "I manage our investments," she stammered, her voice losing its silky condescension and taking on a brittle, defensive edge. "I oversee our properties. I make critical decisions in our business ventures." I nodded slowly, feigning deep consideration. "I see. You manage the money your husband made. You oversee the properties your husband bought. You make decisions about a business your husband built. Or am I mistaken?" Luis slammed his hand lightly on the table, a dull thud that made the silverware jump. "Now see here, that's an unfair characterization. My wife works just as hard as I do." "I have no doubt she is very busy," I replied, my voice dangerously soft, not even glancing in his direction. My focus was entirely on Maruka. But there is a fundamental difference between managing an existing fortune and creating one from absolute zero. There is a difference between tending a garden that was planted for you and hacking a farm out of a barren wilderness. Don't you think? Maruka's lips pressed into a thin, white line. "I don't see what any of this has to do with—" "Let me illustrate," I interrupted, my voice cutting through her protest like a shard of glass. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table, a gesture of command that felt as natural to me as breathing. 40 years ago, I was a 23-year-old secretary. I earned minimum wage. I lived in a single rented room with a hot plate for a kitchen and a shared bathroom down the hall. I ate instant noodles for dinner most nights so I could save every spare penny. I was utterly and completely alone. Torres was staring at me, his mouth slightly agape. I had never told him the full story, never burdened him with the raw details of my struggle. I had given him the sanitized version, the one about working hard and making sacrifices. He had never known the depths of the abyss from which I had climbed. Then, I continued, my voice dropping to a near whisper, drawing them all into the story, I found out I was pregnant. The baby's father, a man who had promised me the moon, vanished without a trace. My family, horrified by the shame I had brought upon them, cut me off. I stood at a crossroads. I could give up, become a statistic, a tragedy whispered about in my hometown, or I could fight. I chose to fight. I took a sip of water, my gaze sweeping across their stunned faces. Calissa was crying silently now, tears tracking paths through her perfect makeup. I worked until the day before my son was born. I went back to work 2 weeks after, leaving him with a kind neighbor during the day. I worked 12, sometimes 14 hours, 6 days a week. And when my son was asleep, I studied. I didn't have the luxury of attending a university, so I made the public library my campus. I taught myself finance, corporate law, international logistics. I devoured every book I could get my hands on, all while raising a child by myself, all while battling eviction notices and figuring out how to stretch $20 to last a week. Maruka's arrogant posture had completely collapsed. She was slumped in her chair, her jewelry suddenly looking gaudy and cheap, like a child's dress-up accessories. Her husband, Luis, looked deeply uncomfortable, as if he had accidentally stumbled into a room where he didn't belong. "It wasn't a glamorous struggle," I said, my voice resonating with the memory of decades of exhaustion. There were no European vacations. There were no designer handbags. My only luxury was seeing my son smile. But slowly, painstakingly, I began to climb, from secretary to assistant, from assistant to coordinator, from coordinator to manager, from manager to director. It took me 20 years of relentless, soul-crushing work, 20 years of sacrifices you couldn't even begin to imagine. But I did it. I paused, letting the weight of my journey settle in the silence. Then I looked directly at Maruka and asked the question that would detonate the entire evening. "And do you have any idea how much that simple woman with the administrative job earns now?" She could only shake her head, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and disbelief. $40,000, I said, the words clear and precise, each one landing like a hammer blow. A month. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a vacuum, sucking all the air and sound out of the room. It was so profound I could hear the faint clinking of ice in a glass from a table across the restaurant. Torres's fork slipped from his hand and clattered onto his plate with a sound that seemed as loud as a gunshot. Calissa gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Luis frowned, his mind clearly struggling to process the information, to reconcile the woman in the thrift store dress with the number I had just named. And Maruka. Maruka just stared at me, her face completely blank, as if her brain had simply shut down. $40,000, I repeated, letting the number hang in the air like a guillotine. Every single month, for the last 2 decades, not including stock options, performance bonuses, or vested interests in the company. That comes to a gross salary of nearly $10 million over my career. And that's before we even touch my investment portfolio, which I can assure you is managed with a great deal more skill than simply overseeing existing properties. Maruka finally found her voice, though it was a weak, strangled thing. "No, I don't believe you. It's not possible. If you earned that kind of money, Torres would know. Why would he think you were poor?" A sad smile touched my lips. "Because I let him," I said gently, "because I never wanted him to know. I wanted my son to grow up valuing hard work, not a trust fund. I wanted him to become a man of character, not an heir waiting for a handout. I wanted him to learn the lessons of struggle and effort because I know, better than anyone, that true strength isn't given. It's earned. Money can corrupt. It can make people lazy and entitled. It can make them cruel and judgmental. I was not going to let that happen to my son. "But your apartment," Calissa whispered, her voice trembling. "Your clothes, your car. What about them?" I asked. "Are they not enough?" "My apartment is my sanctuary, not a showroom. My clothes are comfortable, not a status symbol. My car is reliable, not a statement." I learned a long time ago that the more you have, the less you need to prove it. True wealth is quiet. It's the noise of shouting about your money that reveals how poor you truly are. I turned my gaze back to Maruka, my voice hardening once more. "That is why I came here tonight dressed like this. It's why I pretended to be poor and naive. I wanted to see how you would treat someone you believed had nothing. I wanted to see your true character, stripped bare of all pretense, and you did not disappoint. You showed me exactly who you are." Her face was now a mottled canvas of shame and fury. "This is absurd," she hissed. "You deliberately deceived us. You set us up." "Did I?" I challenged. "Did I put those words in your mouth? Did I force you to look at me with disgust? Did I make you call me a burden and offer me a pittance to disappear? No, you did that all on your own. I simply provided the stage. You wrote the script and gave the performance of a lifetime. And it was, without a doubt, the most magnificent display of arrogance and cruelty I have ever witnessed." Calissa was openly sobbing now, her shoulders shaking. "Mother-in-law, I had no idea." "I know you didn't know about the money," I cut in, my voice softening slightly as I looked at her. "But you knew your parents. You knew what they were capable of. You sat there in silence while they tore me apart. You let it happen." My son finally stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. "Mom, please, let's just go." I looked at him, my heart aching for the conflict I had created for him, but knowing it was necessary. "Not yet, Torres. I'm not finished." I turned back to Maruka and Luis. "Let me tell you something that it seems no one has ever had the courage to tell you. Money cannot buy class. It cannot buy decency. And it most certainly cannot buy a soul. You may have an impressive net worth, but you are morally bankrupt." Maruka shot to her feet, her chair nearly toppling over. "And you are a liar!" she shrieked, her voice drawing looks from the surrounding tables. "A manipulative, deceitful liar." "I prefer the term strategist," I replied coldly. "You walked into this dinner assuming it was a simple inspection. You were wrong. This was a hostile takeover, and I have just acquired all the leverage." The waiter chose that exact moment to approach the table, his face a mask of professional neutrality. "Is everything all right here? Would you care for anything else?" Luis shook his head abruptly. "The check. Just bring the check." As the waiter scurried away, a heavy, toxic silence descended upon the table once more. Maruka sat back down, defeated. The fight had gone out of her, replaced by a dull, simmering humiliation. Her power, the only thing she had ever truly valued, had been stripped from her in a matter of minutes. She looked at me, her eyes red-rimmed and full of a strange, desperate confusion. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Why would you do this?" "Because you needed to be shown," I said simply. "You live in a bubble of wealth, surrounded by people who are either afraid of you or want something from you. You have forgotten how to be human. You look at people and you see only numbers on a balance sheet. Tonight, I needed you to see that the zero you were looking at was, in fact, a number so large you couldn't even comprehend it. And I wanted you to feel, just for a moment, what it's like to be on the other side of that judgment, to be the one who is found wanting." The waiter returned and placed the bill discreetly in the center of the table. No one moved. The tension was a living thing, coiling around us. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, I reached into my faded canvas tote bag, the one Maruka had eyed with such disdain all evening, and I pulled out my wallet. My wallet was old and worn, the leather softened to the texture of a comfortable glove. It was the same one I had carried for over a decade, its creases and scuffs a silent map of my journey. Maruka stared at it as if it were a venomous creature I had just released onto the pristine white tablecloth. In her world, a woman's status was declared by her handbag, and by extension, the wallet within. Mine declared nothing but simple utility, a final, quiet act of defiance against her shallow materialism. I unzipped it and pulled out a single credit card. It wasn't a flashy gold or platinum card. It was a sleek, heavy piece of black metal, its surface matte and unadorned except for my name and title embossed in understated silver letters. Melinda Torres, Senior Vice President, Global Operations. I slid the card across the table. It stopped directly in front of Maruka. The quiet rasp of metal on linen was the only sound in the suffocating silence. She looked down at it, her eyes widening as she read the engraved words. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached out to touch it, as if to confirm it was real. She picked it up, her manicured fingers tracing my name, my title. The card was a tangible piece of the reality she had refused to accept, a piece of the world where I was not the poor, simple woman she had tried to bully, but a figure of immense power. "This is my corporate account," I said, my voice low and even. "It has no preset spending limit. Please pay for the dinner, and be sure to leave a generous tip for the waiter. He's had to endure this unpleasantness with remarkable professionalism. Consider it a gift." From a broke and naive mother who doesn't understand the value of things. Maruka stared at the card, then up at me. The arrogant superiority that had defined her all evening was gone, replaced by something I had never expected to see in her eyes: fear. It wasn't the fear of physical harm, but a deeper, more existential terror. The fear of someone who has just discovered that the entire foundation of their world is a lie. She had built her identity on the belief that money equated to power, that wealth made her untouchable. And in a single evening, I had demonstrated that I had more of both than she could possibly imagine, all while disguised as someone she deemed worthless. I had shattered her reality. I don't need your money," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "I know," I replied, my voice devoid of sympathy. "But I didn't need your pity either. And yet you offered it so freely all night. Think of this as a lesson in etiquette. When someone offers you something out of the goodness of their heart," I paused, letting the irony sink in, "the polite thing to do is accept." Luis, his face a thunderous mask of wounded pride, finally found his voice. "This has gone far enough," he growled, pushing his chair back. "You have been deliberately provocative and disrespectful all evening." "Respect?" I repeated, turning my cold gaze on him. "That's a fascinating word for you to use now. Where was your respect when your wife interrogated me about my salary? Where was it when she suggested I was a financial burden on my own son? Where was it when she offered to pay me off like some inconvenient stray dog you wanted to get rid of? Respect, Luis, is earned, and you two have done nothing tonight to earn a single shred of mine." He clenched his jaw, his pride warring with the undeniable truth of my words. He was a man accustomed to being the most powerful person in any room, and he didn't know how to handle a situation where his money and his bluster were utterly useless. I turned my attention to my daughter-in-law. Calissa was no longer crying. She was just sitting there, her face pale and still, looking from her parents to me with wide, devastated eyes. She was caught in the crossfire, a casualty of a war she hadn't known was being waged. "Calissa," I said, my voice softening for the first time. She flinched, as if my attention was a physical blow. "You are not responsible for the character of your parents. We don't get to choose the family we are born into. But we do get to choose how we act. We choose whether to be silent in the face of cruelty or to speak up for what is right. Your silence tonight, it spoke volumes." A fresh wave of tears welled in her eyes. "I wanted to say something," she whispered, her voice cracking, "but they're my parents. I froze." "I understand," I said, and to my surprise, I found that I did. She was a product of their world, conditioned from birth to equate love with obedience and financial support with control. Breaking free from that kind of programming isn't easy. "And Torres is my son," I continued. "But love, true love, is about freedom, not control. It's about respect, not manipulation. It's a lesson your parents have clearly never learned." My son moved to my side, placing a supportive hand on my shoulder. "Mom, we've said enough. Let's go home." I looked up at him, at the man I had raised, and saw the pain and confusion in his eyes. He was proud of me, I could see that, but he was also reeling from the shock of it all. "You're right, son," I said. "It's enough." I stood up, picking up my old canvas tote bag. I looked at Maruka one last time, her face a ruin of its former arrogance. "You offered me $700 a month to stay out of my son's life," I said, my voice clear and ringing in the quiet restaurant. "Let me make you a counteroffer. I will write you a check for $1 million, right here, right now, if you can give me one single example of a time you showed genuine kindness to someone you believed couldn't do anything for you in return." She just stared at me, her mouth opening and closing silently like a fish out of water. She had no answer. There was no answer. "Exactly," I said. "You can't. Because in your world, people are not people. They are assets or liabilities. And that is the fundamental difference between us. I built my wealth. You inherited yours and married into the rest. I earned the respect of my colleagues. You demand it from your subordinates. I have dignity." I paused, letting my gaze drift over her diamonds and sequins. "You just have a very large bank account." The mother stood up, trembling with a rage that had no outlet. "This isn't over," she hissed. "Our daughter is married to your son. We are family. You will have to see us again." A cold smile touched my lips. "You're right," I agreed. "We will see each other at holidays and birthdays. But it will be different now. I will no longer have to wonder what you think of me. Because I know, and you will no longer be able to hide behind your fake smiles and condescending advice, because you will know that I know. You will remember this night every single time you look at me for the rest of your lives. And that, Maruka, is a far greater punishment than anything I could ever say to you." The father, Luis, had taken out his own wallet, a flashy alligator skin monstrosity. He pulled out a gleaming gold credit card and slapped it down on the tray with the bill. "We will pay for our own dinner," he said through gritted teeth. The waiter, who had been hovering nearby, looking profoundly uncomfortable, quickly took the card and disappeared. The few minutes he was gone felt like an eternity. Calissa was still crying quietly. Torres held my hand, his grip tight and grounding. Maruka stared at the wall, her expression completely vacant. The waiter returned, his face pale. He approached Luis and cleared his throat nervously. "I'm very sorry, sir," he said in a low voice. "Your card has been declined." Luis's head snapped up. "What? That's impossible. Run it again." "I did, sir," the waiter said, looking miserable. "Twice. The system says declined." A dark red flush crept up Luis's neck. "It must be a mistake with your machine. That card has no limit." He fumbled in his wallet and produced another, equally shiny card. "Try this one." The waiter took it and scurried away again. "What is going on?" Maruka whispered, her voice laced with panic. "It must be a security freeze," Luis muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. "It happens when we travel internationally. I'll call the bank." I simply watched, my expression neutral. A moment later, the waiter returned, looking even more distressed than before. "I'm terribly sorry, sir. This one was declined as well." The public humiliation was a palpable thing. The king had been found to have no clothes. Luis stood up abruptly, nearly knocking over his chair. "This is ridiculous," he boomed, pulling out his phone. He stalked away from the table, toward the front of the restaurant, already barking into the receiver. Maruka looked as if she might faint. "This has never happened before," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "Never." Torres started to reach for his own wallet. "Mom, I can just—" "No," I said, my voice firm, placing a hand on his arm. "You will not." I reached into my own wallet again. I pushed past the black corporate card and pulled out another. This one was different. It was made of a heavy, translucent material, almost like crystal, with a visible microchip embedded within it. It was a private invitation-only card issued by a boutique Swiss bank, a card that so few people in the world possessed that it didn't even have a name. It was simply a symbol of a level of wealth that made Luis and Maruka's fortune look like pocket change. I placed it on the table in front of Maruka. She stared at it, her eyes widening in dawning recognition. She had seen cards like this in magazines, in articles about billionaires and oligarchs. It was a key to a world even she couldn't enter. The waiter, summoned by a subtle nod from me, approached. He saw the card and his professional composure finally broke. His eyes went wide, and he took it with a reverence usually reserved for a holy relic. He was back in less than a minute. "Everything has been taken care of, madam," he said, his voice full of a newfound respect. "Is there anything else I can get for you?" "No, thank you," I said. "That will be all." I stood up, collected my bag, and looked down at the shattered remains of the two people who had tried to break me. "The dinner was lovely," I said, my voice dripping with ice. "Thank you for the invitation, and thank you most of all for being so honest about who you really are. You've saved me years of having to pretend I like you." And with that, I turned and walked away, my son at my side, leaving them to sit in the ruins of their expensive dinner, their public humiliation, and their worthless, empty lives. The reckoning was complete. The night air was cool and crisp against my face as Torres and I stepped out of the gilded cage of Northgate and back into the real world. The city lights sparkled below us, a river of diamonds indifferent to the war we had just waged. I took a deep, cleansing breath, feeling a weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying lift from my shoulders. It wasn't just the weight of the dinner. It was the weight of years of biting my tongue, of allowing my son to see me as less than I was, of tolerating the slow, insidious creep of his in-laws' toxic values into our lives. For the first time in a very long time, I felt completely, utterly free. We stood on the curb in silence for a few moments, the valet looking at us with a mixture of confusion and curiosity. He had seen us arrive, me, the dowdy mother in a taxi, and them, the picture of polished wealth. He couldn't possibly imagine the reversal of fortunes that had just taken place inside. Torres was the first to speak, his voice a low, shaky whisper. "Mom, I don't even know what to say." I turned to him, my gaze softening. The anger and steel that had carried me through the evening dissipated, replaced by the familiar, boundless love I had for my son. "You don't have to say anything," I told him gently. "No, I do," he insisted, shaking his head. He wouldn't look at me, his eyes fixed on a distant point in the glittering skyline. "I'm so sorry. I'm sorry I let it get to that point. I'm sorry I sat there while they talked to you like that. I'm ashamed of myself." "Look at me, Torres," I said, my voice firm but kind. He slowly lifted his head, and I saw the sheen of unshed tears in his eyes. "You have nothing to be ashamed of. You were caught between the woman who raised you and the family of the woman you love. That is an impossible position for anyone." "But I should have stopped it," he argued, his voice thick with self-recrimination. "The moment she called you a burden, I should have gotten up and walked out. I froze. It's like you said to Calissa. I froze." "And that's human," I reassured him, placing a hand on his arm. "You've been conditioned, just as she has. For years, you've been trying to navigate their world, to play by their rules, to keep the peace. It becomes a habit, a reflex. Tonight, that habit was broken. That's what matters." He finally met my eyes, a universe of questions swirling in their depths. "Why, Mom? Why did you never tell me? About your job, the money, about any of it?" "We've talked about this," I began, but he cut me off. "I know what you said in there," he said, "about wanting me to value hard work, about not wanting me to be corrupted. I get that, I really do. But it's more than that, isn't it? You didn't just hide your wealth. You hid yourself. The powerful, brilliant woman I saw tonight, I feel like I've never really met her before." His words struck a chord deep inside me. He was right. In my fierce desire to protect him from the burdens of wealth, I had inadvertently hidden the truest, strongest parts of myself from him. I had given him the loving, nurturing mother, but I had denied him the full picture of the woman I had become. "Maybe I was wrong to do that," I admitted, my voice quiet. "Maybe I was so focused on shielding you from the negative aspects of money that I forgot to show you the positive ones. The freedom it gives you, the security, the ability to stand on your own 2 feet and never have to answer to anyone. My silence. It started as a shield for you, but I think over the years it became a shield for me too. It was easier to be the simple mother. It was less complicated. It kept me safe." "Safe from what?" he asked, his brow furrowed in confusion. "From judgment," I confessed. "From people like Maruka and Luis. From a world that often measures a woman's worth by her husband or her inheritance. I built my own world, Torres, on my own terms. And I suppose I was afraid to let anyone see it because I was terrified they might find a way to take it from me or tarnish it with their greed and their expectations. Even you." The admission hung in the air between us, raw and honest. A look of profound understanding dawned on his face. "So you let me worry about you paying your bills," he said, a sad smile touching his lips, "when you could have bought the entire apartment building." "Your worry came from a place of love," I replied, "and that is something no amount of money can buy. I would never trade that for anything. But I see now that I underestimated you. I should have trusted that you were strong enough to know the truth without letting it change the good man you've become." He let out a long, slow breath, a sound of release. "Wow, I feel like my entire life has been turned upside down in the last 3 hours." He paused, his expression turning serious again. "What happens now?" "With Calissa? With her parents?" "That, my son, is up to you and your wife," I said. "You are at a crossroads. You have seen who her parents are, without their masks. You can choose to continue playing their game, accepting their gifts and the strings that come attached. Or you can choose to draw a line in the sand. You can choose to build your own life based on your own values. It won't be the easier path. They will fight you. They will use guilt and money as weapons, but it will be your own." Luis emerged from the restaurant then, his face pale, his phone still clutched in his hand. He saw us and stopped, his expression hardening into a mask of cold fury. He strode over to us, his expensive shoes clicking sharply on the pavement. He ignored me completely, addressing only my son. "I have spoken to my bank," he said. His voice clipped and strained. "There was a security alert on our accounts due to an unusual transaction pattern. It has been resolved." It was a clumsy, transparent lie, but his pride demanded he offer some explanation for his public failure. "This dinner has been paid for. We do not require your mother's charity." He was attempting to regain control, to reestablish the old hierarchy, but the power dynamic had irrevocably shifted. "It wasn't charity, Luis," I said calmly, my voice cutting through his bluster. "It was a statement." He finally turned to me, his eyes burning with impotent rage. "You think you're clever, don't you? Coming here, putting on this little performance, trying to humiliate us." "You don't need my help to humiliate yourselves," I replied, my voice as cool and unbothered as the night air. "You managed that all on your own. I simply held up a mirror. If you don't like the reflection you see, that's a problem you need to take up with yourselves, not with me." Before he could respond, Calissa and Maruka appeared in the doorway. Maruka's face was a wreck, her makeup smeared, her eyes red and swollen. She looked from her husband to me, a wounded, hateful expression on her face. Calissa, however, walked directly to Torres. She ignored her parents, ignored me, and placed a trembling hand on her husband's arm. "Torres," she said, her voice small but clear, "I want to go home. With you. Now." It was a declaration of allegiance. In that moment, she made her choice. She chose her husband over her parents. She chose a future with him, whatever that might look like, over the toxic, gilded cage they had built for her. Maruka let out a choked sob. "Calissa, don't you dare walk away from us." Calissa turned to face her mother, and for the first time that evening, I saw a spark of her own fire. "I'm not walking away from you," she said, her voice gaining strength. "I'm walking towards my husband, and I'm asking you, for once in your life, to respect that. What you did tonight, what you said to his mother, it was cruel, it was wrong, and I will not be a part of it." It was the bravest thing I had ever heard her say. Luis stepped toward her, his face dark with fury. "You will get in the car with us right now, young lady. We will not be disrespected like this." Torres stepped in front of his wife, shielding her. "No," he said, his voice low and steady, a quiet thunder that held more power than all of Luis's shouting. "She's not going anywhere with you. We're going home, together. We will talk when you are ready to apologize to my mother, and until that day comes, we have nothing more to say to you." It was a definitive, unequivocal severing of the strings. He had drawn the line in the sand. The shock on Maruka and Luis's faces was absolute. They had lost control of their daughter, of the situation, of their entire world. They stood there, two wealthy, powerful people, suddenly rendered completely impotent. Their money was useless. Their threats were empty. They had nothing left. I had called a car service on my way out of the restaurant. A sleek black town car pulled up to the curb just then, its engine a soft, expensive purr. The driver, a man I knew named Sean, got out and opened the rear door for me. "Good evening, Ms. Torres," he said, his voice a model of professional discretion. I nodded at him and then turned to my son and his wife. "Get in," I said gently. "I'll have Sean take you home." Torres hesitated. "Mom, what about you?" "I'll get a taxi," I said. "You two need to go home and talk. This is your night, your beginning." Calissa looked at me, her eyes filled with a new, dawning respect, and something else. Gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. I simply nodded. They got into the car. As it pulled away from the curb, I saw Torres take his wife's hand. They were a team. Whatever challenges lay ahead for them, they would face them together, and for the first time, they would be facing them on their own terms. I was left on the sidewalk with Maruka and Luis. They stood like statues, watching the taillights of the car disappear into the night. They had lost. Utterly and completely. I could have said 1,000 more things. I could have twisted the knife further, reveled in my victory, but I felt nothing but a profound, weary sadness for them. They had everything in the world, and yet they had nothing at all. Without another word, I turned and walked away, leaving them alone in the cold, expensive silence, my footsteps echoing on the pavement as I disappeared into the anonymity of the city night. I didn't look back. There was nothing left to see. I didn't take a taxi. The adrenaline that had surged through me during the confrontation had ebbed, leaving behind a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. But my mind was racing. I needed to walk. I needed the rhythmic slap of my shoes on the pavement, the anonymous flow of the late-night city crowds, the cool air on my face to process the seismic shifts of the evening. I walked for what felt like miles, past darkened storefronts and glowing bars, my thoughts a kaleidoscope of past, present, and future. I thought of the frightened 23-year-old girl I had been, making promises to her newborn son in the dead of night. I had promised to protect him, to provide for him, to give him a life better than my own. For decades, I had defined that promise in purely financial and emotional terms: a stable home, a good education, unwavering love. It had never occurred to me that the most important part of that promise was to show him how to be strong, how to stand up for his own values, even when it was difficult. Tonight, in the most brutal and public way imaginable, I had finally fulfilled that last unspoken part of my vow. I had shown my son not just my wealth, but my strength, and in doing so, I had given him the permission he needed to find his own. The image of him stepping in front of Calissa, shielding her from her own father, his voice steady and resolute. That image was burned into my mind. It was the moment the boy I had raised became the man I had always hoped he would be. He wasn't just my son anymore. He was his own man, the head of his own family, ready to forge his own path. The fierce, protective love I felt for him swelled in my chest, so powerful it almost hurt. By the time I arrived at my modest apartment building, the first hints of dawn were painting the eastern sky in shades of gray and lavender. The city was quiet, resting in the liminal space between night and day. I climbed the familiar flights of stairs, my legs aching, and let myself into my quiet, peaceful home. The apartment which Maruka and Luis had seen as a symbol of my poverty and failure felt like a sanctuary. Every piece of furniture, every worn book on the shelf was a testament to a life lived authentically, a life unburdened by the need to impress. This was my truth. I made a cup of strong tea and sat by the window, watching the city slowly come to life. I knew the fallout from the dinner at North Gate was far from over. A battle had been won, but the war for my son and his wife's autonomy was just beginning. Maruka and Luis were not the kind of people who accepted defeat gracefully. They would retaliate. They would use every weapon in their arsenal, emotional blackmail, financial pressure, social ostracism, to try and pull Calissa and Torres back into their orbit. But I had a feeling, a deep-seated confidence that the foundation had shifted. Torres and Calissa had seen the truth, and some truths, once seen, can never be unseen. My phone buzzed on the table beside me. I picked it up, expecting it might be Torres. It wasn't. It was a message from an unknown number. My heart gave a little jolt. I opened it. "Mother-in-law, this is Calissa. I know it's late or early. I don't know what to say, but I know I have to say something. I am so sorry for everything, for my silence, for my parents, for not being the daughter-in-law you deserved. What you did tonight, it was terrifying, and it was magnificent. You opened my eyes. Thank you. I hope one day you can forgive me." I read the message 3 times. The words were simple, but they were saturated with a raw, genuine remorse. This wasn't a calculated apology designed to smooth things over. It was the sound of a person's world breaking apart and beginning to reform in a new, more honest shape. I thought about what to write back. A simple, "It's okay," felt too dismissive. A long, heartfelt reply felt premature. The healing process would be long and complicated for her, for them. It required more than a late-night text message. So I wrote back a single sentence. "Get some rest, Calissa. We will talk when the sun is up." I put the phone down. Forgiveness was a complex terrain. I could forgive her for her weakness, for her silence born of fear and conditioning. Forgiving her parents was a different matter entirely. They had not acted out of fear. They had acted out of malice. They had enjoyed their perceived power over me, relished the opportunity to humiliate someone they saw as beneath them. Forgiveness for that kind of deliberate cruelty does not come easily, if at all. But that was their burden to carry, not mine. My only concern was for my son and the future he was now fighting to build. I must have dozed off in my chair because the next thing I knew, the sun was streaming through the window, warm on my face, and my phone was ringing insistently. It was Torres. His voice sounded exhausted but clear, like a soldier after a long battle. "Mom, did I wake you?" "No, son, I was just watching the sunrise. Are you all right?" "Yeah," he said, and for the first time I heard a note of lightness in his voice, a hint of the carefree young man he had been before the weight of his in-laws had settled on him. I think I'm better than all right. We talked all night, Mom. All of it. the things we've been afraid to say to each other for years. I listened, my heart swelling. This was it. This was the resolution, not the dramatic showdown in the restaurant, but the quiet, honest conversation happening in the dawn of a new day. Calissa told me everything, he continued, about the pressure she's been under her whole life, how her parents' love was always conditional, always tied to her achievements, her appearance, the man she married. She was just as trapped as I was, only in a different way. She thought their way of life was the only way. And now, I prompted gently, now she sees it for what it is, an empty performance. She's scared, Mom. Scared of their anger, scared of being cut off, but she's more scared of becoming them. She told me she doesn't want our children, if we have them, to ever feel that their worth is measured by a price tag. She wants them to know you, the real you. A lump formed in my throat. I swallowed, trying to keep my voice steady. That means a great deal to me, Torres. We made a decision, he said, his voice firming with resolve. We're a team now, a real team. No more secrets, no more walking on eggshells. We called her parents this morning. You did? I asked, surprised by their swiftness. Yes, we laid out our terms. We told them we love them, but we will not tolerate any more manipulation, any more judgment, and absolutely no more disrespect towards you. We told them they are welcome in our lives, but not in our decisions. Our finances, our careers, our future children, those are ours to decide. We told them their financial support is no longer needed or wanted. We are going to make it on our own. How did they take it? I asked, already knowing the answer. Torres let out a dry, humorless laugh. About as well as you'd expect. My mother-in-law wept and accused Calissa of betraying her. My father-in-law called me an ungrateful fool and threatened to write Calissa out of his will. He said we'd come crawling back within a year. And what did you say? I told him not to hold his breath, Torres said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. And then Calissa told her mother that true wealth was having a family that loves you unconditionally, and that by that measure, we were far richer than they would ever be. And then she hung up. I closed my eyes, a single happy tear tracing a path down my cheek. They had done it. They had chosen the harder path, the path of integrity and independence. They had chosen themselves. I'm proud of you, son, I whispered, more proud than I can ever say. I learned from the best, he replied softly. Thank you, Mom, for showing us the way, for being brave enough to fight for us, even when we weren't brave enough to fight for ourselves. You were always brave enough, I told him. You just needed to be reminded of it. We stayed on the phone for a while longer, not saying much, just sharing the quiet comfort of the morning. It felt like a new beginning, a reset. The secrets that had stood between us for so long had been cleared away, leaving only the strong, unshakable foundation of our love. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet of my apartment and felt a sense of peace so profound it was almost overwhelming. The drama was over. The performance was done. The resolution wasn't in the public humiliation of Maruka and Luis, satisfying though it was. The true resolution was here, in the quiet of the morning, in the sound of my son's voice, free and unburdened for the first time in years. It was in Calissa's text message, a fragile olive branch extended across a chasm of misunderstanding. They would be okay. They would struggle, certainly. Building a life free from the influence of people like Maruka and Luis would be challenging, but they would do it together. They had found their footing, and their foundation was no longer built on the shifting sands of her parents' money, but on the solid rock of their own shared values. I had walked into that restaurant as a secret queen disguised as a pauper, intent on teaching a lesson. I had walked out having liberated a prince and a princess from the gilded tower where they had been held captive, and in doing so, I had finally, truly liberated myself. The quiet woman in the modest apartment and the powerful executive in the corner office were no longer two separate people. They were one, and she was finally at peace. The weeks that followed the dinner at North Gate unfolded with the quiet purpose of a landscape after a storm. The floodwaters of anger and revelation receded, leaving behind a new, altered terrain. The relationship between Torres, Calissa, and her parents entered a glacial, deep freeze. Maruca and Luis, true to their word, cut them off completely. There were no more weekly dinners, no more passive-aggressive phone calls, no more unsolicited gifts that were really invoices for obedience. For the first time in their life together, my son and his wife were truly on their own, and it was a terrifying and exhilarating liberation. They made changes, small and large. They sold the large, ostentatious house her parents had helped them buy, the one with the cavernous rooms and the crippling mortgage they now had to shoulder alone. They moved into a smaller, cozier home in a less fashionable neighborhood, a place that felt like them, not like a stage set for Maruca's approval. Calissa, who had a degree in landscape design but had only ever worked a respectable office job to please her father, quit her position and started her own small business, designing gardens for city balconies and rooftops. It was a risky move, but I saw a light come back into her eyes that I hadn't seen since she and Torres were first dating, the light of passion and purpose. Torres, for his part, seemed to stand taller. The subtle, ever-present anxiety that had shadowed him for years began to dissipate. Freed from the pressure to impress his in-laws, he excelled at his job, earning a promotion based purely on his own merit. They learned to live on their own income, to budget, to distinguish between what they wanted and what they truly needed. They were building a life, not a lifestyle, and the foundation was solid because it was built with their own hands. Our relationship, mine and Calissa's, was reborn from the ashes of that night. A few days after our phone call, she came to my apartment, not for a formal apology, but for a cup of tea. We sat in my simple living room, the one she had once viewed with a kind of polite pity, and we talked for hours. She asked me about my life, my career, the struggles I had faced. She listened with a genuine, hungry curiosity, not as a daughter-in-law trying to score points, but as a woman seeking wisdom from another woman. I, in turn, asked about her dreams, the ones she had buried beneath the weight of her parents' expectations. We discovered a shared love for old movies and a mutual dislike for cilantro. We laughed. It was in those quiet, ordinary moments that a real bond began to form, a bond of mutual respect and genuine affection, far stronger than the fragile, performative relationship we'd had before. She started calling me Melinda instead of the formal mother-in-law, and the change felt momentous. One Saturday, she invited me to the local farmer's market. As we walked among the stalls, breathing in the earthy smell of fresh produce and flowers, she confessed something to me. "You know," she said, picking up a bright red tomato and examining it, "for years my mother dragged me to the most expensive department stores. She taught me the names of all the designers, the value of every brand. She taught me how to look rich. But you," she said, turning to me, her eyes clear and direct, "you're teaching me how to be rich." That was the moment I knew everything was going to be all right. My own life remained largely unchanged on the surface. I still went to my high-powered job, still lived in my comfortable but unassuming apartment, still wore my simple clothes. But inside, a profound shift had occurred. The wall I had built between my two worlds had crumbled. I no longer felt the need to hide. I invited Torres and Calissa to a gala my company hosted, a glittering affair filled with CEOs and industry titans. I watched with quiet pride as my son, dressed in a simple but elegant suit he had bought himself, moved through the room with a newfound confidence, engaging people in conversation not as the son of the senior VP, but as an intelligent, interesting man in his own right. Calissa, in a beautiful dress she'd found at a consignment shop, was radiant, her beauty shining from within, no longer reliant on the armor of designer labels. They were not impressed by the wealth on display. They were interested in the people. They had learned the lesson I had so desperately wanted to teach them, that a person's value is not in their bank account, but in their character, their ideas, their kindness. Months later, on a crisp autumn evening, the three of us were sitting in my living room after sharing a simple, home-cooked meal. Kalissa's small business was thriving, and she was glowing with the satisfaction of her own success. Torres was happier than I had ever seen him. "We got a letter from my parents' lawyer today," Kalissa said quietly, breaking the comfortable silence. I looked at her, my heart giving a slight clench. "Oh?" "My father has officially removed me from his will," she said, her voice matter-of-fact, without a trace of self-pity. "He wanted to make sure I knew that my disloyalty had financial consequences." "I'm so sorry, Kalissa," I said sincerely. She shook her head, a small, genuine smile playing on her lips. "Don't be. It's the best thing that could have happened." She reached over and took Torres's hand. "He thinks he's punishing me by taking away my inheritance, but he doesn't realize that you," she said, looking at me, "already gave us the real inheritance." "I did?" I asked, confused. "Yes," Torres said, his voice filled with emotion. "You gave us the truth. You taught us that we don't need their money to be happy. You showed us how to build a life that's truly our own. That's an inheritance that no one can ever take away. It's worth more than all the money in his bank accounts." In that moment, sitting in my simple apartment with the two people I loved most in the world, I felt a wave of contentment so pure and powerful, it was like the sun breaking through the clouds. This was true wealth, not the numbers on a screen, not the title on a business card, but this connection, this love, this shared understanding. I had spent my life accumulating a fortune, all for the sake of my son, and in the end, the greatest gift I had given him had nothing to do with money at all. I had given him the freedom to be himself, and in the process, I had finally claimed that same freedom for myself. The silence that settled over us was not empty. It was full of unspoken gratitude, of hard-won peace, of the quiet joy that comes from knowing you are exactly where you are supposed to be, with the people you are supposed to be with. What would you have done if you were in my shoes? Would you have endured the insults in silence, preserving a fragile peace for the sake of your son? Or would you have unleashed the storm, risking everything to reveal the truth, no matter how painful? Let me know in the comments. I read every one. And if you think this story was shocking, a tale of a quiet mother revealing her secret power, wait until you hear the next one. Hit that subscribe button if you believe in the power of honesty and the strength of a person's character. Only people who believe that money is more important than integrity would refuse to join us on this journey for the truth. At Virtuous Stories, we love you.